Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene, where empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world. My name is Bob Sorentz. My pronouns are he and him. With me today is our minister, Reverend Jen Youngsun Rue, collaborative pianist Suzanne Giordano, vocalist Izzy Krika, and working behind the scenes technical communications coordinator Kat Johnson, along with tech volunteer Amy Desert. We gather in worship to find meaning and to live more deeply. Worship creates connections within us, among us, and beyond us, calling us to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. So whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your image of the holy, we're glad you're here. If you are visiting with us today, we'd love to hear from you and invite you to fill out the visitor form as you feel called. The link is being dropped into the chat now. The flaming chalice is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. The flame, a beacon of our commitment to justice. The chalice, a never-ending source of love. Originally, the flaming chalice was a design stamped on documents created by the Unitarian Service Committee to help Jewish refugees escape Nazi persecution in the early days of World War II. Today, we light the chalice wherever two or more of us gather together in the name of love to remind us where we came from, who we are, and what we can be together.
Good Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Rev Jen, and I'm the settled minister here serving this amazing church in Eugene. Hey, did you all hear that we were named one of the top 3 places of worship in Eugene? That's pretty cool. I use the pronouns she and her. This practice of naming and sharing our preferred pronouns is just one way that our community honors and respects each other's unique identities. I'm so happy to see all of you here today as we begin this new month of November with a new spiritual practice. Now, we've already embraced possibility, cultivated relationships, and this month we are holding history. In a house which becomes a home, one hands down and another one takes up the heritage of mind and heart, laughter and tears, musings and deeds. Love, like a carefully loaded ship, crosses the gulf between generations. That's a lovely reading from our hymnal by Saint-Exupéry. It's often used in child dedications and coming of age and bridging ceremonies when we want to reflect on what exactly we're handing to the next generation of Unitarian Universalists. When we hold history, we're called to deal with where we've come from, who we are, and where we're going. And sometimes that holding is a tender embrace, and other times that holding feels more like wrestling. Come, let us take up the heritage of hope and love. Come, let us worship together. As you are able, find stillness in your body. As you are willing, find stillness in your mind. Imagine the top of your head extending into the infinite sky. Imagine your feet burrowing deep into the earth, rooted in its love. Imagine your mind as a small stone dropped in a clear, deep pond. Watch as it slowly descends through the water and then finally settles on the soft, sandy bottom. Know where you have to be, nothing you have to do. In this moment, no regrets about the past, no worries about the future. In this moment, perfect peace. Perfect moment. Perfect peace.
The poet George Ella Lyon wrote a poem entitled Where I'm From almost 30 years ago. Since then, it has become somewhat of a movement. She partnered with a justice activist with a desire to combat division and hatred. They are collecting diverse voices naming where, what, and whom they are from. Here's my version of Where I'm From. Later, we'll turn on the chat, and you also will have a chance to complete the sentence, where I am from. I am from Matchbox Mattel cars, from hockey sticks and baseball gloves. I'm from a working class, scruffy front yard with slippery hills covered in ice plant vines, perfect for cardboard sleds. I'm from eucalyptus trees whose tall blanched trunks shaded the tony greens of a nearby golf course. I'm from Christmas Eve Mass and roasted pork over an open pit, from De Castro and Serense. I'm from singers and dancers and alcoholics. I'm from Big Boys Don't Cry and Do As I Say, Not As I Do. And Bye Bye Miss American Pie, drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. I'm from a U.S. Navy family and born at the San Diego Balboa Naval Hospital, and the Philippines, and pancit and lumpia. And long ago, a Turkish sailor who jumped ship in the Philippine Islands. I'm from an old black and white photo of my father looking proud and handsome upon the celebration of his graduation from a high school military academy. I'm from a box of letters from high school sweethearts, birthday cards from family and friends, letters from my wife, Denise, and yearbooks from junior high, high school, college, and seminary. I'm mostly from Southern California and spent 2 childhood years in Taiwan, then back to California in La Mesa, Anaheim, college in La Mirada and Fullerton, Lakewood, San Anselmo, Lake Arrowhead, Tustin again in Anaheim, and Ventura, and now I'm from Springfield and Eugene in Oregon.
Well, I hope you'll keep thinking about where and what and who you're from. I am from Fisher-Price Toys and a one-hallway school building. I am from political dissidents and women who did things their own way. We all come from somewhere, someone, something. And these places and people, artifacts and events are incredible gifts. And sometimes they are curses. They are both blessing and they can be burdens. And some of these things have been so intricately woven into our very being. Generational trauma, what the Korean people call Han, travel mysterious pathways that are not easily healed with the passage of time. As for other parts of our past, some of us have found the power to choose which ones to keep and nurture and which ones to just leave on the side of the road. Recognizing the stories that I come from helps me to know who I am and helps me to become the person I want to be. The same can be said about communities of memory, communities of tradition. Unitarian Universalism came from somewhere, came from someone, came from something. Our religious ancestors handed down stories and heritage and culture, and each new wave of Unitarian Universalists took up parts of that history and heritage that would help them to shape our collective identity. We are responsible for holding history. But what exactly are we holding? And what do we want to hand off to the next generation? History. It's simply the story of what the heck happened. It tries to be factual, dates, times, location, the people, and the actions they took. But since all facts are transmitted through a human mind, it's hard to find pure facts. And so history is a story passed through the minds of a person who made choices about the importance of this fact over this one. That's why looking back at our own personal histories can sometimes cause regret. It's not the facts that stir up uncomfortable feelings. It's the way we interpret those facts, judge ourselves, blame others. So going back to the UUs, what are the facts of Unitarian Universalist history? Well, there are dates of very important meetings. There are records of conflicts and proclamations and lots of names. Our favorite way of telling our history seems to be to lift up the names of prominent Unitarians and Universalists. Mostly they are well-educated, they are influential leaders. I actually have a t-shirt full of names of those UUs. It's one way of holding history. Sometimes we've even named them even if they weren't Unitarians or Universalists. I was on the board of the Southeast District when we were working really hard to change the name from the Thomas Jefferson District. It was so surprising to me and often disheartening to hear the pushback from our congregations. Thomas Jefferson was never a Unitarian, and so why would we name one of our denominational districts after him? But actually, I do understand why we do this. We're a minority religion. I mean, some people think we're a cult, right? And so when we name presidents and actors and inventors and famous authors as UUs, it gives us a sheen of respectability. And being a minority myself, I get that. I know the lure of respectability. But when we tell our history in this way, it speaks more to our insecurities than to the good news of our faith. I have sat through and taught a lot of UU history classes in my years, and I'll confess to you that I have never felt really comfortable holding UU history. And for me, it really is more like wrestling with it, trying to find a place for myself within those pages. The thing that makes me unsettled about UU history is not the facts of what happened, it's the way we have told the story, which impacts how we know ourselves as religious people. I feel unsettled about the choices we have made, about whose voices are included in those stories and which ones we have forgotten. And I wrestle with UU history because for a long time, the legacy that was passed from generation to the next has been about the betterment of self and society, without really considering that betterment for one can be harmful to another. There's an archive held at the Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. It houses the work of UU leaders of color, and that archive is called Sankofa, which is a word from West Africa meaning, it is not taboo to go back and fetch what you have forgotten. The Sankofa bird is shown with its feet facing forward, but its head looking backwards. This archive goes back to fetch what we have forgotten about our own history. When we repeatedly carry forward the favored stories of our ancestors, it really does shape the way we see ourselves. When we proudly tell the stories of our abolitionist ancestors, our civil rights activists, they reflect well on us, right? We love to tell the story about how the Unitarian minister Theodore Parker used to keep a pistol in his desk because his anti-slavery preaching was agitating the Boston industrialists. But things get complicated, though, when we go back and we fetch what we have forgotten. We have forgotten that even as white abolitionists and black abolitionists may have had the same goal of ending the inhumane institution of slavery, their reasons were not always the same. The African American struggle rose from their own histories, written in blood and bone and tears. And many white abolitionists felt a different kind of anguish. They saw slavery as a moral blight upon the white race. And just because they hated slavery and just because they were putting their lives on the line to abolish it, it did not mean that they saw African Americans as siblings, as religious kin. The next quote I'm going to read is particularly cruel. I remember how I felt when I first read it. And I never want church to be a place where people feel harmed, especially people of color. And so I just want to say that even though I don't want to necessarily repeat these things, I also believe that we've been silent for way too long, and I don't want to forget where our institutional habits came from. So with all of that, here is one of Theodore Parker's lesser-known quotes. He said, "Any Anglo-Saxon with common sense does not like this Africanization of America. He wishes the superior race to be maintained rather than the inferior." Now, some of you may say that it's not fair to judge our ancestors based on our 21st century standards. Yes, these men were simply echoing the sentiments of the times in which they lived, but frankly, I am sick and tired of hearing that excuse, because in those times were always people who were able to see the evils of slavery and the evils of their time beyond being a moral blight on the white soul. Throughout his career, the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed has reached back into our history and brought forward the forgotten names and stories that continue to disrupt the neat, clean narratives that we still live by. In 2017, he delivered the Min's Lecture, and this scholarship provides the seeds for my message today. While we easily hold the story of, let's say, King Sigismund and the Edict of Torda in 1568, we spend very little time holding the history of the Black ministers who opened up Unitarian churches in Chicago and in Harlem and in DC, not to mention the ones who just never got a chance. We don't hold the history of Joseph Campbell, who started going to a Universalist church all by himself when he was 10 years old. And later he went to seminary wanting to become a Universalist minister. He reports that a certain person at the New York State Universalist Convention complained to the dean, "Why are we wasting denominational money on a..." Yes. He actually used the N-word there. Campbell graduated from seminary in 1935, but neither Universalists nor Unitarians would ever settle him. Few of us are aware that in the 1950s and the 1960s, nearly 10% of Unitarian congregations had African American members holding positions of leadership. They carried that collective power to the 1969 General Assembly in Boston and beyond, in a period that we have come to call the Black empowerment, or the empowerment tragedy, or, as past UUA President Bill Sinkford likes to call it, the white power controversy. When we leave out the stories of UUs, who weren't part of the dominant culture in all the diverse ways that we see now in our churches, we end up with an incomplete and even warped sense of who we are and what this faith is all about. We end up carrying forward a particular culture rather than a theology for all peoples. We lift up a certain kind of intellect, a certain form of worship, certain types of music, certain processes of decision-making that aren't always preaching the good news of our faith, but reinforcing a certain image of ourselves, an image that we are people who have always been on the right side of history. The entire world is changing. Our country is changing, and that means our faith is changing. Reverend Morrison Reed finds hope in the fact that we have reached a critical mass with ministers of color. Because of the bold and controversial institutional changes we've made in the past decade, he estimates those numbers are going to keep rising, and he actually estimates that they're going to double every 12 years. Now, while this may make a lot of people's heart bubble with joy, it also makes some people very uncomfortable. You can see that discomfort oozing out sideways in something called the Fifth Principle Project, Todd Eckloff, the Gadfly Papers, and a growing number of its supporters. You know, this is a huge shift for us as a denomination, making space for the voices and perspectives of people who have been marginalized and allowing space for them to be at the center of power. And so when you put this together with the emergence of long forgotten and very painful stories from the past, the pushback is understandable. I know that division and conflict and separation are all part of change. And while I feel sad that this will continue to be part of our living tradition for many years to come, I will tell you one thing that makes my heart glad, and that's you. You lift me up and you hold me. Your faithfulness holds me. Our faith calls us to a wider UU history, one that does not erase the voices of the past, but adds more truth to them and amplifies new ones. We do this so that we can have a better understanding of who we are and what we can do together. We are Jeffrey Campbell and Theodore Parker. We are from Boston and Oregon. We are from vegan, gluten-free casseroles and pancit and lumpia. We are from fear and love. We are from God and the works of human hands. Praise be our ever-expanding and courageous faith. Amen. For all of these joys and sorrows that you've shared this morning, we are grateful. And we also recognize that some of the contents of your hearts are still a little too tender to share with others. And so we acknowledge that as well. Will you pray with me in any way that you choose or want to? O Spirit of life, gracious and loving God, we lay before you our hearts cracked open with joy, joy at vaccines finally available to our young ones, cracked open by joy for these beautiful fall days, walks along the river, for reunions with family members, for time by ourselves and time with our loved ones. We also lay before you our hearts closed down by fear, our hearts trembling in confusion at how children and youth could die so needlessly at an overcrowded concert, trembling in confusion and sadness for our neighbors who are cold and hungry and sleeping in the mud. The evils of the world disrupt our concentration. They scatter our focus when we would do good works. O mystery divine, come to us. Give us what our spirits need to shock us into action, to lift us from despair, to love us in our brokenness. Draw us close to you, that we may draw closer to one another. Amen.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thank you, Bob and Izzy and Suzanne, for all the wonderful music, and Bob for your story. Thank you all for being here. And now go out into your day and into this fresh new week, remembering that at each moment, life sets before us life or death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and the generations that come after may also live. Go in peace, my friends. Bye-bye.